So I don't know if you can hear me, colleagues who
Yes.
have joined the session. If you agree, we are going to start with the session on volunteer data management systems. Let me first introduce myself. This is Ferran Cobertera, working at the Spanish Red Cross as head of volunteering, the volunteering area of the Spanish Red Cross. And together with me, I have Lotte and Paul. Lotte, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. Morning and good evening, wherever you are. So yes, I'm Lotte. I work for the British Red Cross. I am the Assemble product owner. Assemble is our volunteer data management system. And I work in the volunteering and youth area of the British Red Cross.
And morning, afternoon, good evening, everybody. I'm Paul Remic. I'm the head of volunteer systems and data here at the British Red Cross. Got more people entering the room in a second.
Yeah, thanks to you. Thanks you all for attending this session. As I mentioned, this is the session on volunteer data management systems, which is framed under the RC3 long night of research. The session, unfortunately, we cannot provide interpretation to Arabic, French, or Spanish, so the session will be held entirely in English. It will have a length of 45 minutes. And also, just to let you know, my colleagues Paul and Lotte are going to post on the chat a link to a Google Doc that we will use to manage the flow of this session. If you, the Google Doc is open. In theory, you can access to this Google Doc and you can edit wherever you want. We will explain between Paul, Lotte, and myself how we will manage the session, and also just to let you know that the session will be recorded. Okay. I don't know if you can hear us because I don't see any reaction. I politely request you, but if you don't want, you can do it. To turn on your cameras just to see if we can see each other. But if you don't want to, please feel free to open it or not to open it. As I mentioned, the meeting will be recorded. The issue here, or our aim, is to open as a workshop to open the participation to all of you to discuss what is a volunteer data management system under our perspective. What is the situation of the volunteer data management systems in your respective national societies? So this would be, in a nutshell, what we pretend to work on this session. So I invite you to be fully present on the session. Again, if you do agree with us, please switch on your cameras so we can see each other. Or if you want to introduce yourselves through the chat, you can do it also. Lotte, over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ferran. So yes, I've put the Google Doc link in the chat, and I'll, depending on how active it is, I can redo that if anyone loses that link. But please feel free to put your questions in there and share a bit about yourself. So, you know, what your name is, where you're from, what's your role, background in your national society, and also, you know, what you are looking to get out of this session. That would be brilliant. Paul's shared the presentation that we're working through, and I'll just run through sort of the agenda. So again, we've done the hello and welcome, and again, if you'd like to tell us about you in the Google Doc. So essentially, Paul and I are here to talk about volunteer management system, and also to find out what your understanding is of it. We'll also look at what might be preventing you from having your own volunteer management system, and how you would bring a volunteer management into your national society. All of us have got very different needs out of it, or, you know, we might have different levels of numbers of volunteers. So it's really just sort of establishing what we're all looking for with a I'll say VMS. So I'm not constantly saying volunteer management system because it's a mouthful. And then if we've got time, we're happy to do a question and answer session. But again, we've got the Google Doc, and then we'll do a roundup and a session close. So that is the agenda for our session. Thank you, Paul. I think you're up.
Okay, great. So I think these slides will be shared after the session. So for those of you who've just recently joined, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I forget used to keep saying that. The three of us here are the super team who will take you through the next 40 minutes or so just to talk about volunteer management systems, VMS. Of course, we'll use that abbreviation throughout all of this. So that's who we are. And we'll do a little bit of a tag team to take you through some of these key questions that we think are important when you're thinking about volunteer management systems. And we had to consider as we brought our volunteer management system into the British Red Cross. So we want a little bit of your input. We'll ask you some questions, but we'll also tell you about what we've been doing and how that's been going as well. So as we've got three killer questions for you, three big questions, and feel free to use the chat when you think about the responses to this, or use the Google Doc, however you want to do it. But one of the first questions we thought would be important to ask is what actually is a volunteer data management system? We're using this term more and more frequently. And so I think it's useful to think about whether we have a common understanding, which we probably do for the most part, but I bet there are some nuances depending on which country you're from and your circumstances and all of those things. So we wanted to start by asking you all, what would you use a volunteer management system for? What key features do you think would be included, and even do you already have something that you're using to collect this information and to help coordinate your volunteers? What exactly does it do for you? So like I said, if they're just prompts, there might be other things that you want to tell us, but I guess we're just trying to get from you, our colleagues, your understanding of a volunteer management system. So please feel free to kind of post in the doc and the chat, and Lotte, you're going to keep an eye on that, aren't you?
I am indeed. We've got one, just the feedback is just learning. So I think some people are here just to learn about volunteer management systems, which is great because we've got some interesting info that we can share with you on that.
Yes, yeah. Although we're still learning too. I don't think we'll ever. Always. Well, I think we'll ever stop learning. But we will tell you a bit about our journey and what we've gathered. And maybe as I do that, I'll tell you a little bit more about what we've done in the British Red Cross. It will help you to think about some areas to consider if you're planning to take the steps forwards to get your own volunteer management system. So try to keep it fairly straightforward, fairly simple. Of course, it does lots of other things besides this, but these are the key things that we use our volunteer management system for in the Red Cross. We have bought a system off the shelf. It's a software as a service, and we get to configure that software to match our particular circumstances and needs. As we configure that software, we break it quite often. We have to work with the owners of the software to tweak it and to fix it. But ultimately, we are using a product that is used by many charities here in the UK and some of the big charities too. So we have a good network of people, but we have some limitations as well with using a software as a service. However, it does these key things. So it allows us to recruit our volunteers. It gives a very consistent, a standard recruitment process and journey for our new volunteers joining the organisation. It gives them an online progress update as to where that recruitment process is up to. So it will help manage things like our vetting checks and our references and the interview process. It steps through all of those different things. And what volunteers tell us is that they really love the fact that they can log into a system at any time and see where their recruitment is up to, rather than just sat waiting to hear from somebody, so they can actively look at the volunteer management system right from that first step. They can send documents to us. They can send us messages through that process as well, and it just makes sure that that first experience of joining the Red Cross is a really good one. So they get a really kind of good first impression. What happens then is, as they start to do their volunteering, it captures the training that they've undertaken for that role, and it makes sure that they have done all of that training. Otherwise, it flags a message to say that you have some training outstanding. And then as they volunteer over a number of years or a number of different events, then we can attach awards to their volunteer profile within the system. And again, the volunteers have access to this system, so they're able to see what they've been doing, or see new opportunities. They see their own data, their own profile, so they're able to keep an eye on and kind of they're empowered to do this themselves. They can make contact with us, with their manager, with others in their team, and they can use our platform to claim expenses too. So there's some key features there that we think are important when considering a volunteer management system.
We've got some, again, thank you everyone. You're putting questions or sharing what you want to get out of the session in the chat and the Google Doc, which is brilliant. Keep them coming. No questions at the moment, but again, a lot of it is sort of learning trends and examples from what others are doing, which is, again, what we're here for. Learning what can be expected from a VDMS, which is a really, really good point, because it's a lot of us want different things out of our volunteer management system. So I think it's quite useful to hear how we're all using it. And it's something that Paul and I continue to do in the British Red Cross, is speaking to those other charities that are using Assemble or using other volunteer management systems, because knowledge sharing is so powerful. So yeah, thanks for that.
So if there's no particular questions coming through, Lotte, I wonder if there's a bit more we can say about maybe the more recent things that we've been doing with our volunteer management system. So, making sure that all volunteers have a manager, making sure that we keep an eye on the processes and so on. So
and on that note, I think, and not to go too long into our journey of sort of migrating all our volunteers onto the system, but it was a very long journey of getting all the information that we needed onto our volunteer management system. And now we've got a permanent team. We're very fortunate to have a permanent team, albeit we're a small team and we work all the time, but we're very lucky that we've got that team, because it's, as Paul said, it's the focus now is making sure that volunteers are in the right place, that each service on the system has a structure that makes sense to them, because we have lots of different services, from independent living to crisis response to refugee services. They all work so differently. So we can't design a volunteer management system for them all, but we can make sure that what one service needs, they're being supported, and we've got those systems in place. So at the moment, there's a lot of work working with those services, working with those volunteer line managers to make sure that they're understanding the system, that they can help their volunteers, through the expense claiming process, through the training process. So there's a lot of sort of cross-service support at the moment that we're looking at, and it's a big project, and it will go on for at least the end of the year and probably onwards. But that's something that we can ensure people get the most out of this system. We've also got things like, and I'm just sort of looking now if you mention them, Paul, but a lot of our services use Assemble, our volunteer management system, for events, which is very, very popular, works very, very well, as well as rotas, so they can sort of manage what their volunteers are doing throughout the week. So there are all these little key components that our team is making sure we're supporting with.
It's great, thanks, Lotte. And I think as well we can we could talk about a recent example of where we've used our volunteer management system for good effect and how it's really benefited us. So just to try and make this real to everyone. So our volunteer management system has a record of every single volunteer who's with the British Red Cross, regardless of their role. They're all in one system. And we used the events function to kind of contact our volunteers in and around the London area during the state funeral for Her Majesty the Queen. So towards last year, as you may have seen in the news, lots and lots of people, I'm not sure how many, I think it was certainly more than 100 people, attended while she was laying in rest in London. The queues of people and the amount of people who came to London to see her for one last time and to pay their respects. We managed to use our system to create some events and invite volunteers to come and help support those who were in London at that time, to give them some psychosocial support, check on their well-being, make sure that they were comfortable and okay whilst they were queuing for hours and hours and hours. So our system helped us to organise that event, to contact those volunteers, to find which volunteers lived within a certain location. So we were able to say, how many volunteers do we have within a 15-mile radius of Westminster, of 20 miles, and we're able to contact those volunteers. So it really came into its own during that event. We've used it in a similar way during other events too, but I think that's probably the most high-profile one that we've worked on so far.
Thanks, Paul. And again, please, feel free to put in any questions in the chat or the Google Doc. Those of you sharing what you want to get out of the session, brilliant, really helpful. So thank you for that as well.
Shall I move us on to question 2?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Paul.
Okay, no problem. Just realised, Lotte, you were supposed to do that question, weren't you?
Oh, well, it's all right. I mean, we're all sharing here.
During the dress rehearsal.
During the dress rehearsal.
That was the case. So I wondered if would you like to take everyone through this one, and then I'll do the final one. Okay.
Absolutely. So this is around what might be preventing you at the moment from getting a VMS, volunteer management system. I'm going to say that word so much on those words on so much on this session.
I'm going to never say it again.
I know, I'll never say it again. So again, we were fortunate in that we sort of had even it was an interim team when the system was brought in, we were able to sort of look at what we wanted to get out of the system, who it was really going to benefit, how we would look at migrating all of our volunteers from the system they were on onto this system. And again, please put in whatever your concerns might be, but we just put in some key ones that we know that we looked at, and it was things like, the problems we might encounter. So obviously funding, how much is this going to cost? Did we have the funds for to migrate a huge amount of volunteers onto a system that we didn't know yet? Obviously we didn't understand what the system really looked like at the time. We knew we had an idea of what we wanted it for, but we knew that would also grow in time. So it was looking at all those different aspects of it. Again, resources. I'm sure that's an issue for everyone on this call, and it certainly was for us, that, what resources will we need? We're all constantly running at sort of too much. We just don't have enough capacity for everything that we want to do. So we need to make sure that that wasn't going to just add pressure on people, that it was going to support them, that we had enough of those resources in place as well. Again, that links to capacity. At the time, it wasn't a permanent team. So when I joined the team, we had sort of, begged and borrowed different colleagues from different areas to share their expertise on making this a success. That's not sustainable. So, what happens after that? Is there a permanent team in place that can, look at taking it forward? Again, capability and skills. So, none of us had done this before. We all had different skills, but what were we actually looking for? What did we need to make sure that this was going to support volunteers as well as their line managers? And again, we probably all feel this way, not even knowing where to start. I think it was in the previous presentation, Paul, that you shared, where it was, oh no, I think it's actually coming. When we brought the system in, it was a few months, I think, just before the pandemic, and it was just for a very small team for recruitment purposes, because it was taking us quite a while to recruit volunteers, and that was obviously quite a big issue. So this was really brought in as a recruitment tool. And then COVID hit and everything changed. We needed to work in a completely different way. And then Assemble, which is our system, became that, okay, we've got this volunteer management system. What can we do with it? Where do we even start? How do we run out these pilot projects? So these were the sort of key things that we were looking at. And again, if I'm just checking on the Google Doc, if anybody wants to share what, if you're at that point in the process now where you think you need a volunteer management system, but you don't know where to start, you don't know where those sort of risks are that you might encounter, please feel free to drop them in the Google Doc or the chat.
Yeah, there's a really good point here from Hiroko. Thank you for adding this from Japan, about their volunteers being maybe of an age and maybe of a skill set that actually accessing an online system isn't really something that they can do easily. And I know we also struggle a lot with that as well. So maybe it's worth talking about how we have empowered our volunteer line managers and our super users just to help give that ongoing support, but also some of those offline, so recognizing that we're not just doing everything online, that we have some offline processes as well. So can you talk to that a little bit, Lotte?
Yeah, absolutely. You've mentioned, so super users was something that has been a great source of, helping us with our resources and capacity. So for example, our super users are part of the services. So we'll have super users in crisis response, mobility aids, refugee services, and they're that key between our team and those services. So they bring the questions or the concerns to us that their services are having, and they're sort of that commonality, that common bond between us and the services. So for example, they help their teams understanding the basics of the system. Obviously, I mean, we're a permanent team of 5, and we cover Northern Ireland, England, Scotland and Wales, all volunteers and all line managers. So that's a huge number of people. So we don't have that capacity. So it was a way to make sure that those services had somebody they could go to better understand the system and to better support them. They've helped massively with things like training, for example, where a line manager looks at their volunteers, can see, oh, okay, I've got a few volunteers where they need to do some training. Where do I start? And they use those super users to say, oh, okay, well, this is how you use the training, the learning management system. This is where you get into Assemble to find that, and this is where you do the training. And then it automatically updates from the learning management system onto Assemble. So they're really helping them through that whole process. Obviously, for bigger issues, they can come through to us, but it's really helped us make sure that we are supporting everybody. Paul's mentioned, offline volunteers. It's a major focus point for us at the moment. Is how do we make sure that we're not neglecting those volunteers who either don't have access to, a laptop or a mobile phone, or they just don't want to. They're of a certain age where they don't want to learn new skills. They've got so much to offer from a volunteer perspective, but they might not want to, go and get an email address or anything like that. So there is a lot of work we're doing at the moment of how do we reach those people. But the volunteer management system has really helped us see where that gap is, where we were sort of blind to it originally. We actually maybe didn't have a number of, or an idea of how many people we might sort of, cut out or lose. So I think that's a major focus for us this quarter, but especially, going forward this year. And it's also prevalent in a lot of our what teams. So retail, for example, where we've got shops. So our volunteers come in and volunteer at the shops. They don't need They don't need a laptop. They don't need a phone. So it's definitely helped us bridge that gap.
Yeah. Thanks, Lotte, and thanks, Louise, for your question as well, which I think kind of also kind of supports this point and adds to Hiroko's question. So Louise was asking whether volunteers from the British Red Cross were involved in the development of the volunteer management system. So we are going to cover that in a little while, but I think with respect to volunteers who maybe struggled to access, and when we recruit new volunteers, if they're struggling to access technology or our systems, then we have some volunteers who will help by running drop-in sessions. So they'll hold regular Zoom sessions like this, and most volunteers now, most people, in fact, because of the pandemic, can actually use things like Zoom. You know, they used it to keep in touch with family and loved ones during the pandemic. So they're used to using things like this. And then for that small pocket of people who still aren't, then we'll just use things like old-fashioned phones, and we'll try and contact them that way. So we have colleagues in our volunteer support line, for example, who will help reach out to various volunteers if we know, or if we are spotting, like Lotte mentioned, if we're able to see those that maybe aren't able to use our systems. But we'll cover a little bit more about volunteers' involvement shortly.
There's also another question. Does the line manager, are they also volunteers in the UK? And this, it completely depends. We've got a lot of staff who are volunteers, who also line manage volunteers. We have a lot of different volunteer roles. So, for example, I'm a staff member in the volunteer and youth team, but I'm also a volunteer for crisis response. So although I don't line manage volunteers like that, I know there's a lot of line managers that also have volunteers and are also volunteering. So we have a lot of roles, and it's a very big part of our day is sorting out those roles and making sure that everyone's in the right one.
Okay. So I'll just move us on here, Lotte, if you just want to summarize.
Yeah. So again, just on what we were talking about, sort of what the sort of not risks, but what were things that we had to think about before we brought it on. So as you said here, British Red Cross, we ran a project to implement our volunteer management system between 2020, 2022. As I said, we started this pre-COVID, and then it definitely changed when COVID hit, because we knew that volunteering was changing, that the support that we gave was changing, and that a lot more things were being done online. So this did involve a project team, including additional resources. So as I mentioned, at the time, we didn't necessarily have a permanent team. It was sort of borrowing from other systems and other colleagues of, you know, who could share their skills. But because we saw how much support was needed going forward, it gave us the ability to say, we really need a permanent team to support this. This isn't just a one-off project where you're bringing volunteers over. There's so much more support that needs to go forward with regards to, you know, training, with regards to different roles popping up all the time. So to make sure there was that key support. But we are fortunate that, you know, we knew we had to require, you know, funding. So we were able to say, look, this is realistically how big this project's going to be. This is what funding we need. And we were in a fortunate position that you know, we could get that. We also needed to ensure that we had sufficient time, and Paul, you know, wrote this presentation, but it's very true about it needed to be effective, not quick. And that's really something that has changed the way we work in a crisis response organization, where things are having to be done very quickly. And we were able to say, look, we need to do this properly. If this is really going to benefit volunteers and their line managers for years to come, we need to make sure that we've done this properly. So we really had to look at how big this project was going to be and how long it would take. And then the last point is also, I think probably affects us all, is communication is everything. And people take a long time to change, especially in an organization, as big and as old, essentially. There's a certain way of working, and to make sure that change is implicated in a positive way, it takes a certain amount of time, but it also takes specific sort of communication. And we were very careful, I think, not to over communicate, where people are just thinking, oh, this is just too much, this is another system to work on, I just don't have the capacity, versus this is what's going to help you down the line. So let's break everything up, let's do baby steps, and let's just focus on things that we can do now, and really project manage this properly. So those are all the things that we've really learned from bringing in this volunteer management system.
It's great, Lotte, thank you. We've just had our 15-minute warning, so I'm going to move us on to the last question. And last question will help us answer your question as well here, Jacob, about involving volunteers through an agile process and how that works. So we'll talk all about that in a second. So we just wanted to kind of throw some questions out to yourselves. Again, use the chat and the Google document if you like. So before we go into how we did it, we'd be really interested in your thoughts on how you might go about bring this in, and what would your procurement process look like? How would your project team work? Would that be made up of existing people? Would you bring some different people in? Have you done something similar, bringing in a new piece of technology? What worked and what didn't? And how would you include volunteers if they are key users of a particular system or product? How would you go about including them in what you're doing? All of these were things that we had to consider, of course, and many more. We just think these were three quite interesting things to reflect on. So like I said, use these as prompts, these questions. Feel free to put in the chat or the document. Lotte's keeping an eye on that. In the meantime, before I just move on, Christina, you've asked a question here about a brief explanation of the volunteer management system and its successful example. So I think we can talk a little bit about that in the next, when we talk about how we brought our system in at the British Red Cross, and where that, I guess there's a little bit after that about, okay, now what? Now we've brought the system in, what do we do with it now, and why do we have a permanent team, and how is that working for everybody? Anything else, Lotte, in the document, or anything?
No, just again, I think you're good to move on, because I think it sort of leads into some of the questions that we've got. Okay,
great, thank you. So I'll just move some things around my screen here so I know what I'm saying. So initially it took us 2 years to bring in properly the volunteer management system. In large part, that's because of the pandemic. We're going to blame the pandemic for lots of things, I'm sure, for the rest of our lives, and quite rightly so. It was an interesting time. So we actually launched twice. Like Lotte mentioned earlier, we procured Assemble, our volunteer management system, and then the pandemic hit, and we had an opportunity then to just use the system without really knowing what it was or how to use it, and we kind of learned on the job very quickly in order to get some benefit out of some of its features. And once things started to settle down a little, and the initial shock of the pandemic was starting to wear off, and we were starting to get into more of a rhythm of how to help some of those most vulnerable, we returned back to, okay, if we were going to do this again, how would we do it? And we started to really plan for a proper rollout of our volunteer management system, kind of service by service, very carefully, not rapid, cleaning the data as we went. And as we did that, we recognized that we had used Assemble so far, our volunteer management system, in a very particular way, and we'd not really included volunteers as part of that rapid pandemic deployment. So this was our opportunity to go back and make sure that they were included. So they joined our team, they joined our board, our program board to implement this. And we had kind of reference groups of volunteers where we would check in and make sure that they understood the terminology, that they could influence the way that some of the language that we used and the way that, that this operated. Now, as we were rolling out our volunteer management system at this time, we were working partly waterfall, in a waterfall way, your standard project management. Here's big chunks of things that we need to do, and then within that we had some agile processes as well. Now, we never really talked to volunteers about waterfall and agile. They didn't know. They just knew that if they were coming to talk to us on a certain time, a certain day, it was about a particular topic. That was for us to worry about where it sat in a sprint, or where it sat in the whole process. So we never really went through what methodology we were using. That said, I think that was a bit of an opportunity missed, because I think had we explained that to some volunteers, they may have got something, they may have got a bit of a kick out of seeing how that methodology works. They may have got some really good kind of insights into seeing how agile an agile process works or doesn't, because we've changed the way that we operate now. We no longer work in sprints, we work using Kanban. So so having volunteers learn from that process and feed into it would have been in hindsight, that would have been great. The other thing that this middle section here with the director's chair, which I thought was quite cute, was that we had to have this sponsored by senior management. So our senior responsible officer, who is an executive director, really championed this from the outset. It's something we need to do. It's very, very important. And she was able to remove some blockers. So, for example, when a particular part of our organization just didn't really want to work with us, didn't really want to take on a new system, felt that it wasn't of benefit, she was able to help persuade them, which can be extremely helpful. So having that senior management sponsorship is absolutely integral to this, and really works for us. And we've mentioned it a few times, because actually we're quite proud that we've been able to do this, is to get that permanent support team in place, because this isn't a once and done. This isn't bring in a volunteer management system, then the world is great and everything works. This is do what you can, then tweak along the way, constantly refine, constantly improve. And you can only do that when you've got a permanent team who understand the product, who can work with the vendor, who include volunteers, who include staff as well, who hear that user feedback. And so that's why we have a product owner, Lotte. That's why we work this as in a product management style, so that we can get the best out of this system and make the most out of our investment.
Thanks, Paul. No more questions, but just I think for Christina's question around could you give us a brief explanation of a successful example firsthand? What came to mind for me, and Paul, you might have another one, but it was around the recruitment, how before we brought in this system, recruitment was taking around 75 plus days to onboard a volunteer. We're now around 20 to 25 days. So that's had a major impact for our recruitment team, how quickly we can onboard volunteers. And that is due to this volunteer management system that we use and the process that we've established. So that's made a huge difference. Yeah, it absolutely has. I'd say as well, one of the big differences we've made that we hear from volunteers is, for the first time, they can see their volunteering record. You know, they've not had this ability before. They can log in, they can see what their role is, they can see who their line manager is, they can see when they started, what training they've done, what awards they have, and that's really empowering for volunteers. And they love to be able to do that and to use this system. And what we want to do next is kind of supercharge that a little bit, is run with it. Thank you, Louise. And really build on it, so we can look at our volunteer management system less of a management system and more as for volunteers to try and build a little bit of a community. So how do they
use the news feature? How do they share messages with each other? How do they connect as a team? There are some functionality within our volunteer management system that we just haven't got to yet, because we've been doing all this other work, and now we can really start to explore some of those things that we think will really kind of add that cherry on top of the cake. So we're really excited now that we're moving from quite dull, boring stuff like data cleansing. We need to do it. It has to be done. But it's not exciting. Nobody gets excited by cleaning data, I hope. So now we get to really make it useful and of benefit, and that's what we're really excited about. Okay, any more questions there, Lotte, from anyone?
Nothing new has come in. If you want to move to so I've popped this in because I know sometimes you might not have a question at the time, but it might pop into your head. So please feel free to take down my email address. If you've got any further follow-up questions, or just sort of want to find out in more detail how we did it, please feel free to email me. We've spoken to quite a few charities in the UK, so we're always happy to help where we can. Oh, thanks, Louise. You've also shared it in the chat. That's brilliant.
That's great. Okay, so we've a couple of minutes left. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And one last question. Thank you, Salam. I need to have a license for every volunteer to have an account. Yes, we do. It costs, and it's only a small amount, but we pay our vendor. I think it's three English sterling pounds per user per year. So we have an annual recurring charge. So it's really important, therefore, what's the benefit of that is to make sure that all the volunteers that we do have within our volunteer management system use it, know that they are a volunteer, because sometimes that isn't the case, and understand how they can benefit from it. So it really helps kind of make sure that when you're paying for something, that you're not wasting any money. So we have a constant eye on the 10,000 or so volunteers we have here in the UK to make sure that they know that they're part of the British Red Cross, and that they have the ability to access this wonderful system, that they can check on their records and so on. So again, it's not a once and done for us. We are continuously trying to get the most out of what we have. With 2 minutes to spare.
We do. We have 2 minutes.
Yes. Well, as we have 2 minutes left, Paul, sorry, did I interrupt you?
No. All I was going to do is stop sharing so I could see everybody. Hello.
Yeah, in these 2 last minutes, we will keep open the Google Doc, just in case you want to include any more questions at the end of the Google Doc, and also I will post it on the chat, if I can. Yeah. You have two final topics. If you want to be on the loop for more information on volunteer data management systems, we invite you to write down your name and email, just in case you want to be on the loop at the end of the Google Doc. And also, I have shared with you an evaluation form prepared by our friends and colleagues from RC3, the organizers of the long night of research, just in case you want to evaluate this session. So please feel free to write down your emails in case you want, as I mentioned, to be more informed about the VDMS. Please, we invite you to complete the evaluation form. And I think that's all from our side. As I mentioned, the Google Doc, we won't close the Google Doc, so it's still alive. Feel free to put whatever questions you want. I will talk to Lotte and Paul just in case if there is any interest to organize something in the future.
I've just popped my email in as well again, so
yeah,
feel free to email us.
Sorry, Ferran, I missed because I was coming in a bit late. Is there a Google Doc? Because I really need to know more about all aspects of volunteer management systems.
Yeah, we post again the link, Jacob.
Perfect. Thank
I
you all.
just popped it in the chat again.
Thank you. Great session.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
thanks so much to all of you, and thanks for attending.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ferran. Hi.
How are you, Iloko? Nice to see you.
Good, very good. Thank you very much for your presentation and support. I'm very enjoying this event.
Yeah, are you? How many sessions have you attended?
This is the second one.
Oh, which was the first one?
Early in the morning, I had attended about MOTI.
How was it?
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it was
actually, it was the second time to learn about that, because I learned that directly from the Pictet, Gabriel Pictet.
Yes, I know him.
Yeah,
I know him.
Yeah, but thank you very much.
Yeah,
So
you are really welcome.
You are the organizer of this event.
This concrete session, because the main organizer is Luis, the colleague from the French Red Cross Foundation. I am behind some of the sessions, but mostly this, because we have General Assembly of the Spanish Red Cross this weekend, starting this afternoon.
Wow.
So we will have a very hectic weekend here in Madrid. So really nice to see you again, Hiroko.
Yeah,
Really nice to see you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.